Hello. This video is called Materialism and Responsibility. Materialism and Responsibility. Okay. Now, there are many definitions of responsibility you can find in dictionaries, and oddly enough, now many of them are based on the ideas, of you're required to do something, and if you don't, you'll be punished and so on. And you rarely find one reflecting ideas such as a sense of duty, for example, which, by the way, I treated in my previous video, materialism and a sense of duty. Materialism and a sense of duty. And the one of the definitions of responsibility, which I find excellently to be closest to the truth, is basically the ability to make things go right. The ability to make things go right. And obviously, one might add the willingness and the ability to make things go right. And obviously, as such, it is something that has to be voluntarily assumed. It's something you want to do, you decide to do, right? Now, because all these other definitions based on force or a threat of force or punishment if you don't do this or that as is required of you. Sure, there is a place for a certain, pressure from the outside. It can be motivating, unless it's breaking. It should be applied with reasonable, in a reasonable measure, and so on. But essentially, if the only concept, the only idea you generally encounter in society, and so after time learn to understand and accept, is based purely on outside pressure, monitoring, force, punishment if you don't, and blah blah blah, then eventually what you get as a matter of fact is robotism of sorts. People acting as robots, because it's simply all mechanical, and they're forced to do it, work as a cog in a big machine, and if you don't rotate as you're supposed to, then pressure is brought to bear upon you. So you do get as a net result of such an understanding and attitude to responsibility in society. What you get as a net result is a sort of robotism, really, which is something that you unfortunately very typical these days, and you can see it almost anytime you try to get a service. At least if you somehow somewhat expect to be serviced as a human being and not as a robot by a robot. Yeah, it's a desperate laughter, I'm laughing here out of despair. Just to explain, if you watched, more of my videos, I guess the more perceptive of you get this. Yeah. So anyway, you might say that responsibility starts with responsibility for oneself, right? You first should should make things go right for yourself, and then hopefully perhaps also help things go right for others around you. As a matter of fact, as a matter of sober fact, it's not. It's quite unreal to speak of any responsibility exceeding oneself in materialism, right? In materialism, if there is any defendable concept of responsibility, the way I have defined it, it's only a responsibility for oneself, naturally. For oneself, to the extent that it is possible, because, as you know, you mainly are determined by your circumstances and environment, and so many things are up to chance and so forth, and you come upon a guy you find really unpleasant, and say, well, I'm sorry, but the knife just fell out of my pocket and ended up in his belly. It's the environment, chance, not responsible. That's just happened. I don't know. Don't blame me. It's just an accident that so happened, or the combination of the, outer forces, the outer workings of this mechanical universe caused it, and that's so. Even the responsibility, the concept of responsibility for oneself is problematical in materialism. And you see, criminals often they often do not feel guilty for their crimes, if you ask them, and when they say they do, when they confess, so on, it's oftentimes, in the hope that, they would diminish their sentence and, so forth. And I guess it's always been the case. But at least, in some time of the past, there was this idea, which was common, that a crime may have consequences, by God, or in the afterlife or the next life and so forth, which was an idea that might have been, a motivation for a criminal, at least some of them, to try to reform. If he could. But in today's peak materialism, there are no such generally accepted extant ideas. So to reform a criminal is no longer even considered as a possibility. And certainly one works both ways. Why should the criminal, how would such an idea even occur to him? On what basis? On what basis? You see? I mean, the deep inner, the fundamental basis. I'm not talking about, do you maybe want to fit back in society, or rehabilitated, and they will get a job again, and blah blah blah, and then, these are factors, but to reform oneself as as a criminal is quite a task. So what I'm pointing at here is the missing, fundamental spiritual motivation. That's what I'm referring to here. Now, maybe I'm not entirely right. Can there be any concept of responsibility for others in materialism? I'd point out that by my previous premise alone, it's very doubtful, because if even having responsibility for oneself is a problem, it's problematical in materialism, how can you go a step higher? But let's entertain the, let's dissect the try to dissect the idea a little bit. So okay, what basis could there possibly be in materialism to have a responsibility exceeding one's self? Responsibility for the other or others. Well, one of the philosophical answers in materialism would of course be, I cannot be responsible for others because they are free. Not freaks, but they are free. Meaning, in materialism, unpredictable, selfish animals without any shared ideals, values, or ways. The only ideal being, do whatever you want. That is absolute freedom for the individual. So, well, absolute, I mean, there will always be limits, but I'm discussing this in the frame of reference of self-assumed responsibility for oneself, and by extension, or if you want to go on a level higher, than also for others. And well, and I think it's easier, it makes things easier, to just say, well, I can't be responsible for others really because they are free. They themselves are responsible for their own actions or inaction. And I think it's easier that way too, isn't it? After all, why would you go to the trouble of being responsible for such selfish, uncaring bastards? But is society possible this way? I mean, if one wants to live in a good, safe, comfortable society, and he sees somebody clearly throwing a spanner in the works and spoiling the party, then he better take some responsibility for that, for one who does it, no? Or if, on the other hand, one sees another fellow coming up and suggesting a vital remedy for something going very wrong in society around, well, then one better, I'd say, take responsibility for supporting such a fellow. Some responsibility for him and the idea. Huh? Now, I will posit here an axiom. I talk about axioms and what the axioms of a civilization are in my very first video, I believe. What is civilization? What is civilization? And the axiom is, if you can't have a responsibility for it, real responsibility, you cannot have it. Not for long, anyway. Civilization including. If you can't have responsibility for it, you cannot really have it. And have it in the fullest sense of the word, to the full enjoyment of it, of the thing, without any fears or doubts and so on. I hope you know what I mean. And no, you know, mechanisms, you know, well, no mechanisms to ensure that things will continue to go right, in the right direction, and that we can preserve what we have, like civilization, yeah, or anything really, one's health or peace of mind, what have you. A lot of meat. And no mechanisms to ensure that will help. For real responsibility always is, only is, and must be personal. Obviously, for you must assume it voluntarily as a person. It's an attitude, and it often takes resolve, and sometimes the willingness to take a risk or make a sacrifice. Yeah. Can a mechanism or a machine make a sacrifice? You think? Can it? Well, now, one might say, well, we have the politicians and a lot of police, and, you know, it's their job to be responsible for our society, to preserve it, to keep it the way it is, to make things go right in it, and blah, 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 blah. Well, yeah, it's, you know, it used to be that when one saw a man in need of help, he would try to help, and when one saw a man doing something very wrong or destructive, make an attempt to stop him. And you don't see this very often anymore, do you? Well, so, but why? Because we have the politicians, the law, and the police, and it's their job and their responsibility, isn't it? Well, all these are individuals, aren't they? They are not abstracts or machines or processes. They are individuals. And an individual in materialism cannot really conceive of a responsibility exceeding himself. Not even responsibility for oneself very well, as I tried to explain at the beginning. It's simply not real enough to him. So how can a politician or a judge or a policeman do it? How? How can they? I mean, they share the basic ideas and convictions. I dare not speak of ideals about the society around him as you do. Right? They've not come from the moon or Mars. It's their job. What does that really mean? What does it mean? It's their job. Real, true responsibility is not something one can mechanically do as a job. You cannot love somebody as a job. It is something you have to feel, assume. In fact, espouse as an ideal. And so, my initial definition of responsibility may be expanded to the resolve, having the resolve, the assumed duty to make things go in a certain direction, a certain way, the right way, against all the odds. I will do all I will be able to for it. I shall overcome my fears. I shall overcome the obstacles and so on. Well, just how often do you meet with this attitude and mindset? A genuine manifestation of such an attitude and mindset these days? I wonder. Okay. I think I'll be drawing to a close here. An idea which is related to responsibility is answerability. We all know you are answerable to your superior and so on. But if you take the greater concept of responsibility, who do you answer to? God? Conscience? Your ideals? Your principles? Which, in fact, are not very real without ideals, because they need ideals as their bedrock to have any real meaning or power. Is conscience possible in materialism? A defendable concept? Conscience, conscience once used to be identified with the voice of God in one's mind. But there is no God in materialism. And there are no ideals in materialism. There is no higher, more noble nature to man. In fact, man has no nature. No fundamental, inherent, fixed nature which defines him as man. Man can be made into anything by his upbringing, the environment, society. There is nothing else in him aside from the basic animal instincts and reflexes, such as the survival instinct or the sexual instinct. Nothing else in him except for what the society has put in him. There is no spiritual nature to man. And so, he can be made into anything by correct social conditioning. He can be made into a creature without conscience, or he can be made into one with something like conscience, a social construct implanted into him, of course. Make sure you report your neighbor for, doing this and that and saying this and that, and to be a good citizen. If you don't, he may snitch on you, instead. Oh, well, I'm a good citizen, I have conscience. I have to go report. Snitch on all my neighbors, just to make sure I'll do it faster than them. Yeah. Sorry. Tend to get ever more cynical as I get older. But back to the topic. So, after all has been said, you cannot really be responsible in materialism because you are only a product of your instincts and inborn impulses. You cannot control the product of your society, and you are completely subject to, relativism, relativity, a leaf in the wind. You can try, sure, but you may have the goodwill and, to be a good and decent citizen. You may try, but you fail, and you fail again, and no one can really make you responsible. It's just happened, so accident. I had an irresistible impulse, or things so happened, so worked out, and it's not really, you can't blame me, and yeah, I'll be more positive about it. And so, with this core idea, thinking long enough with this fundamental idea that you cannot really be responsible, isn't it likely that one concludes, even a person of relatively goodwill, concludes one day, why even try anyway? Thanks for watching.